March is the time to get your garden ready no matter where you live. In this video, I've got a checklist that will help keep you on track whether you are in a warm climate or still experiencing the cold temperatures of winter. March is a transitional month in the gardening calendar, and what you're going to be able to do is going to be highly dependent on where you live. But there are definitely things that you can get started on to set yourself up for a successful gardening season. So let's dive in. I'm going to start off by going through the checklist for warm climate growing areas. First up is direct sowing early season crops. Now is a good time to check and see if the soil is ready for you to directly sow seeds into the garden. You want to make sure that the soil isn't too cold or too wet at this stage. What you want to do is dig down a couple of inches and try to feel the temperature of the soil. You can take your wrist and put your wrist down to the soil, and it should feel cool but not cold to the touch. And then to test for moisture in the soil, what you're looking for is if you take a handful of soil, it should form a loose ball when you squeeze it together. You shouldn't have water coming out of it, or it shouldn't form like a hard pack ball of dirt. That would tell you that the soil is still too moist and you want to give it a little bit of time to dry out and potentially to warm up. We can turn our attention to the plants that are already established. So thinking about how to prune trees and shrubs, and also dividing perennials. With trees and shrubs, late winter, early spring, these are good times to take a look at trees and shrubs you have and prune back any dead material to the next closest point of live growth. And then when it comes to your perennials, now is also a good time to think about dividing those perennials. And so dividing perennials is a great way of getting more of the same plants. And as your perennials are coming out of their winter dormancy, this is a great time to think about dividing them. Once you have an idea of where you want to plant them out, get them out then in the ground as soon as you can, so that way they've got a chance to get established and growing well for the new season. Now is also a good time to start warm weather crops indoors. So depending on where your last frost date is, this might be a great time to get those warm weather crops started. Things like squashes, cucumber, corns, beans, these are all good warm weather crops to start inside. So doing this is a good idea to get them a head start on the growing season. So you'll be able to put out larger, healthier, stronger plants out in the garden, and then they can really take off. Doing seeds indoors, you're going to be pricking out the best seedlings and potting those on. And as you do want to make sure that you are giving not just water, but also start to giving them some food as they get bigger and as you continue to pot them on before they get out into the garden. And so while you're thinking about feeding the plants that you're starting to grow indoors, the last thing on my checklist is to turn your attention also to fertilizing perennials and composting the garden outside. Early springtime is a great time to start fertilizing perennials. We typically fertilize our perennials at the start of the season to give an injection of nutrients as they get growing and they come out of the winter dormancy period. I like to use a organic, well-balanced fertilizer. Just a general all-purpose fertilizer is great just to, again, get nutrients into the soil after having gone through the previous growing season and in through the winter. I'll usually sprinkle it on the ground around the perennials. You can scratch the fertilizer into the soil a little bit, and sometimes I don't bother, honestly, but you can scratch it in to that just to get it a little bit, encourage those nutrients to start working their way down and through the soil. Keep an eye on the weather though, because you don't want to spread out the fertilizer right before it rains, because then that rain can wash the fertilizer away from where you intended it to be. To prep my vegetable beds for the growing season, I like to mulch with either compost or grass clippings, something that is going to break down gradually over time throughout the whole season. Now on to gardening tasks in cold climates. So if you're like me and overnight temperatures are still well below freezing, there's a coating of snow and everything, I can't even see the garden yet. There are still things that you can do in March. Get yourself ready, get yourself a head start on the growing season to come. First is, just like just like in a warm weather area, you can start sowing seeds indoors. Check your last frost date and use that date to plan when you can start sowing seeds indoors. Our last frost date is typically towards the end of May, so the beginning of March, which is about 8 weeks until our last frost date typically, this is the time of year where I like to start peppers indoors. And then around the middle of March, about 6 weeks before the last frost, is when I like to start tomato seeds indoors. If you have at least a month of cold temperatures ahead of you, and if you're in zone 2 through 6, that's probably the case, you can still do some winter sowing. This is the best time to start cool weather vegetables like cabbages. It's also a good time to start any perennials that need a brief chill period, say like 30 days or so, and these you can also direct sow outside around this time. So if you're still stuck inside because it's too cold and snowy out, it's still a great time then to check and maintain your gardening tools. You want to make sure your tools are clean, sharpened, and oiled and all ready for the new growing season. Don't forget about the lawnmower. Your lawnmower blades need to be sharpened as well. And it's pretty easy to do that on your own, or you can find somebody locally who does sharpening services and they can sharpen your lawn blades for you as well. You can also venture outside and check on any of the maybe fencing that you have around any of your garden beds. Look for any places that might need repair. Maybe there's holes, or maybe there's parts of the fencing that have come down with the snow, or things like that. You want to make sure your fences are in great shape before you start planting out your vegetables for the season. Once the snow melts and the temperatures begin to warm, now it's time to prepare your garden beds. If the soil is warm enough, by the end of March, it's a good time to plant cool weather crops like peas or radishes. Just like I mentioned earlier in the warm climate tasks, you can dig down in the soil a couple inches, use your wrist to feel the temperature. Again, you want it to be cool. Cool is okay, but not cold. And again, you want to check on the moisture level. Cold, damp soil is not friendly to anything that you're planting out in the garden. So even though it still might be late winter, the beginning of early spring, there are things you can do to get yourself going for the new season. Whether you are gearing up for gardening in a warmer area or starting your seeds indoors, this checklist should keep you on track. Thank you very much for watching. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more gardening tips and advice, and click on that notification icon so that you never miss an update. If you found this video helpful, let us know and share it with your gardening friends. Until next time, happy gardening.